So I have a riddle for you, and I promise that it pertains to the story, okay? So, a man is dropped off on a deserted island, and he still figured out a way to become a millionaire. And how did he do it? So, give yourself some time. Stop me if you've heard this before. The answer is because he started as a billionaire. Now meet the once untouchable Mafia kingpin, Bai Suocheng. He's the ruler of neon casinos, armed militias, and this, little billion-dollar scam empire. And he was found huddled in a rat-infested shack, eating cold noodles, and pretty much praying that every knock on his shack wasn't the end. And I'm gonna tell you right now, the fall for this guy was extremely dramatic. Probably the most dramatic fall that I've heard of. This guy was pretty much stripped of his crown, his cash, and now his freedom. And it's not because he crossed, the wrong warlord or double-crossed some triad guy. He pissed off the granddaddy himself, China. Now, regardless if he's a piece of shit or not, well, he's a piece of shit, but he does have a pretty fascinating story, okay? Because the question crops up, how does a dirt poor border brat from Myanmar's opium fields climbs out of the confines of abject poverty? Because this kid climbs out of it to become a warlord. And he goes on to build this mafia dynasty named after himself, the Bai Mafia, only to eventually get hunted like a dog by the world's most powerful police state. Well, of course, to better understand the fall, you have to know about the rise. So we're gonna get to it, and it's a very intriguing story. Hopefully right now you'll be intrigued by that like button, and hey, drop me a comment, even if it's just to say hi. And we're gonna have to rewind to when Bai was just this scrawny little kid running barefoot through the poppy fields, because this is the backdrop of where the monster was born. So his parents lived on the borders of China and the country Myanmar, but back then it was known as Burma. Now these borderlands were basically a breeding ground for rebels and warlords. They were all capitalizing on these smuggling routes. The opium fields were abundant and lucrative if you were a resourceful and cruel warlord, and cruelty is definitely in the warlord's handbook. Now, Bai's parents, they were just peasants, right? Laborers on the lower rungs of society. Although the Bai family, they were not just like all the other locals, okay? They had Chinese bloodline that stemmed from the mighty Yang clan, which were loyalists to the Ming dynasty in the 1600s. Now, unfortunately, they were driven out of China by the Qing dynasty, forcing them to flee across the border in 1662, where they find themselves today. But it was there, along the borders of Burma, that the Yang clan, they set up shop, and they ruled like feudal warlords. So we're talking about royalty here, okay? The Yangs held sway over the trade routes, paying tributes to keep everybody loyal and running the whole damn show, all while appeasing granddaddy by paying lip service to China, right? You still have to show gratitude to Big Daddy. So how did the current Bai family become reduced to working in what essentially is a prison camp? So here comes, the gut punch. Fast forward to 1959, and the Burmese government, fresh off independence, was so done with all this feudal shit, basically all these foreigners ganging up and controlling that border area. So they slammed down the hammer. And on April 29th of that year, the ethnic Chinese ruling all across the states, including the Yang heirs, had to hand over their titles, their power, to the new central regime, pretty much gadooshing all the old princely systems into oblivion, right? No more thrones, just paperwork and now these empty palaces. The Bai family itself found themselves as low-rung Communist Party members, and they were just scraping by on minor official gigs and family trades. No more fancy education, no more silver spoons, just raw hustle of a poor fishing town where opium harvesting was simply a way of life. And in this new gritty reality, in 1962 was born little Bai Suocheng, the kid who would one day flip the script on all of this, as if he felt like because of his bloodline, he deserved a lot more in life. And so Bai Suocheng, he grew up dirt poor, in the foggy Kokang woods while his parents hustled odd jobs just to eat. However, young Suocheng, he had a powerful weapon at his disposal, and that was his mind, okay? It was described as sharp as a switchblade and just as ruthless, like the hills that he was born in, a product of his environment. So by his teens, which was now the late 70s, he was already snooping around the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, which was this ragtag rebel outfit fighting for these ethnic Chinese, along the borders, that lost all their badges, I guess you could say. Now, let's witness nepotism at its finest. The only other one I could see that's on par would be LeBron and Bronny James. Now, I'm going to introduce you to a name that you must keep in mind, and that is Kya-shin. Now, he's a key player in this army, and luckily, Suocheng's uncle was his right hand. Well, uncle was not very healthy, and he felt his young nephew was gifted, so he asked Kya-shin, to pull some strings. And what do you know? The moment uncle could no longer do his duties because, dead, a fresh-faced 27-year-old Bai slides right into command and straight up inherits an entire army. Then he signed a 4-year contract worth wrong nepotism. Now let's fast forward to the 2000s, and Suocheng has turned that inheritance into a dynasty. He pretty much catapults the whole Bai clan into what is known now as Kokang's infamous 4 families, and that's this untouchable elite of families that consisted of the Pengs, the Lius, the Yangs, and now the Bai family. Amongst these families, they all took slices of arms smuggling, selling guns, right? Heroin hauls, and they paid their underground tributes that kept, their hills in good favor. And Bai Suocheng, he was in the midst of it all. He was considered the brains of this entire 4-family operation because he diversified from AK-47 runs to meth labs, now raking in millions while dodging Thai patrols and Burmese raids. By 2005, he was wheeling and dealing, and he started making connections. One key connection was dealing with this rising military star named General Min Aung Hlaing. Now you have to picture these two powerful men chilling in a back room by themselves, handshakes over cognac. They would talk about the average stuff men would talk about, like trading militia muscle, for money, or turning a blind eye to some of these wheelings and dealings of Suocheng. Basically, it was a match made in corruption heaven. The relationship allowed Bai Suocheng to make these quiet chess moves that resulted in major gains. Now, enter the Bai Sheng Corporation in those early 2000s. And on paper, this corporation looked squeaky clean. They were considered a hospitality giant that built hotels and resorts. Really, it was all just a front to launder money through these Vegas-style casinos where Chinese high rollers would come donate their money playing rigged blackjack. Because a man like Bai Suocheng, he is not going to play fair with you, okay? You're playing this 3D chess and you think you're playing it very well, while Bai is playing some 4D chess behind the scenes. So publicly, he was this philanthropist, right? He's funding schools and clinics, all while being this private shadowy puppeteer, taxing every truck that went through the border. Every shipment was pretty much raided by his border patrol, but what we can say is at least he was equal opportunity, because he didn't care if you were legit or where you were crooked, because even the smugglers had to pay their taxes. So he goes on to get married to a local beauty in the 90s, and he has a son named Bai Yingkang and a daughter named Bai Yinglang, or Yinglan, raising them both pretty much in a palace built on corruption. So Bai outwardly is this respected elder, and he's throwing these village feasts, and everyone loves the guy that's providing free food. He's the kind of guy that everybody tips their hat to, but behind that beloved image, of course, quietly, his militia was swelling to 300 to 400 trigger-happy loyalists by the mid-2000s. He was bent on enforcing his own order, okay? Because, come on, man. There was royalty in his blood, wasn't there? And he craved restoring that order as if he was wronged somewhere down the line, which, I mean, it's arguable. So this man, he's rewriting the rules, right? Turning this rebel handout, basically, from his uncle and Fyung into an empire. And yes, you might not see the stains on his hands, but they're there, dripping red. Then came the day that Bai made his critical move. In August of 2009, Bai Suocheng is now serving as the vice chairman of the Myanmar army. He is the number 2 guy of it all. He goes and sets up a super secret meeting with one of the generals named Mong Ai. Now, together, they plotted to oust the commander-in-chief, the number 1 guy. And his name, drumroll, Kya-shin. Do you remember him? The same man that helped him get to the position he was in. So, Bai Suocheng was truly showing his true colors now, right? At this point, a snake in the grass that was just thirsty for power, right? Well, of course, the number 1 guy was not going down without a fight once he realized there was a mutiny at his door. So, Kya-shin deployed artillery and troops when Bai made his move. The battle was a complete disaster for the people that lived along those borders, right? Because it laid waste to their communities and their homes for days, and it caused widespread destruction. This caused 37,000 ethnic Chinese refugees to flee back across the border to China amidst all this gunfire. Now, the Yunnan province where all these people went, they saw such an influx of people, it strained their resources. It would also strain the China and Myanmar relations because it forced Beijing to intervene, okay? Sort out the matter regarding so many displaced people. Now, I want you to keep this incident in mind because it would essentially be strike 1 from China against this little zit named Bai Suocheng, a name they'd hear again in the near future when he was a big fat pimple on their nose. So back to the infighting, okay? After 10 days, Fyung's forces began to crumble as Bai wrestled away the power. And he did it all with minimal losses to his own army. Light work, as the kids would say. Fyung Kya-shin was basically banished to the Nether Realms, also known as the neighboring province of Yunnan. So yes, the former number 1, along with 200 of his loyal men, were also forced to flee, all while Bai struts in as the new number 1 commander-in-chief. And now this 200 square mile border in northern Shan state was now his playground. Now, he didn't rule all of Myanmar, that would be absurd, but in those familiar misty hills with his 400 armed goons loyal just to him, he was the absolute king. And so his plan is underway, and that was to rebuild from the rubble into, those illicit money-making ventures he's grown to love. He would start implementing his family into the business, right? He placed his son, Bai Yingkang, as deputy of the border guard force. Pretty much Yingkang was the enforcer. And he goes to appoint his daughter, Bai Yinglan, as head of the gaming commission. So with a dad like Bai Suocheng, ruthlessness and money trumped loyalty and basic scruples. Now let's talk about the Bai Sheng Corporation. That phony baloney LLC that Bai Suocheng created to hide his illicit gains. Well, those illicit gains were about to skyrocket to the moon as it now had on the books even more hotels, banks, and casinos. Of course, you need more casinos to wash all this dirty money because he was still selling guns and he was still pushing drugs. So his border militia would soon be given badges. They were official now. They could officially tax the smugglers at the Chinese borders. And this alone would bring the Bai family mafia $100 million yearly alone, just from taxing these fools. By 2015, Bai Suocheng was sitting upon his proverbial throne, just looking over his neon-lit Sin City of his own creation, all the while buddying up with these Chinese triads, all types of shady characters from the underworld. Those were the people he felt most comfortable with. But then, boom. Was that dramatic? A ghost from his past crashes the party. See if this name rings a bell. Kya-shin was now pulling the strings from some Chinese hideout that he ran to, right? But he still knew a lot of people, right? There were a lot of holdouts still in the area from that fateful battle. So, led by his own son named Peng Darren, a full-on guerrilla warfare was launched, to get back this turf. They didn't go in with any type of warning shots. These were savage ambushes on Bai's border guards, hitting convoys with straight-up RPGs, and just random gunshots would ring out along the jungle trails, pretty much making this border area into kill zones, okay? Bai would lose 20 to 30 men from these skirmishes in just a short 4-month span. But of course, to a man like Bai Suocheng, the thing that probably hurt more were not the deaths of his men, right? It was those border raids. They're fucking up his border game. They were sabotaging his supply lines, which hurt, which made his money look funny. And remember Kokang's 4 infamous families, right, of gambling, drugs, and gun dealers? Well, Fyung began to rally these old Kokang heads, loyalists, against the traitor as well. Bai's operations were being hit in a major way, and he watched all his men. They were terrified, and his ammo stockpiles, they began to drain. And for a man like Suocheng, how many times do I gotta say, and a man like, I'm not gonna say it anymore. For Suocheng, there was only one way to deal with this. Hustle even harder. And just like the last video I made about Chen Ji, please go watch that, Bai also had these scam compounds. So in short, they were like call centers that befriended or romanced people into making fake investments. So Suocheng upped the trafficking of more victims into these fraud farms to fund his guns. Now, he's gonna look cool as a cucumber, but there is just no way that Bai is not sweating under the crown at this point for the first time. But a man like Suocheng, I'm just playing. But Bai Suocheng is still sitting pretty as the boss of his little border kingdom, right? He goes and he greenlights these scam compounds, and they began popping up everywhere. We're talking fake resorts that were actually prisons, and they were all crammed up in those same misty hills of his childhood. We're talking about 40 plus of them under his watch by 2023, and they were all fortified. They had barbed wires, razor wires, armed guards, and pretty much zero escape routes. His border guard force, a lot of them were now used to, patrol these compounds, watching like loyal watchdogs, shaking down anyone who got too close or just a bit too nosy. And inside these compounds, it was hell itself, okay? Tens of thousands of victims, lured from China, Vietnam, even Africa with bogus job ads, and they would simply be dumped into these facilities, chained to desks 18 hours a day, forced to run pig butchering scams. They would sweet talk strangers on dating apps or just straight up fake crypto chats, build them up with phony wins, and then bleed them dry before ghosting them altogether. And if you want a deeper dive into the king of pig butchering himself, the guy I mentioned earlier, Chen Ji, you can watch this video wherever I put it somewhere. So needless to say, within these confines, it was brutal, okay? Guards would taser those that refused to work. And if they kept resisting, they would starve them. And let's just say the torture would just progressively get worse and worse if you didn't comply. So Bai Suocheng's empire was now raking in billions of dollars a year. And, after payroll and expenses, his slice alone was hitting the hundreds of millions a year and growing, all washed through casinos and other fake programs like industrial parks, whatever could serve as a funnel. Now, like I mentioned before, this is a family affair. Bai Yingkang handled the military muscle with force, keeping the BGF locked down and the compounds secure. And it's been reported that he was just as bad as his dad. Maybe not the same brains, but just as ruthless, okay? And then you had his daughter, Bai Yinglan, and she played tax lady, right? For the gaming commission, squeezing every single fucking penny from the casinos, which doubled as a crypto laundromat. Now, with sufficient guns and personnel, Bai was able to keep that pesky Kya-shin, I almost forgot his name, at bay. Bai Suocheng was now living larger than ever before. He was schmoozing with big shots at lavish dinners, but he was still that scoundrel warlord at heart, even when he was already in his 60s and he probably should have just sit back and smell the roses. This was a man who'd rather just cut the rose just to see how much he can get for it. And he was still looking for favors, whatever the next big scam was on the horizon. This was all fun and games for him, but across the border, another old foe was getting fed up. Remember when I told you to keep China in mind? Well, their rage was bubbling up as Bai was now officially this giant pus-filled pimple on their nose, and they were going to pop it because here comes strike 2. And unfortunately for Bai Suocheng, China was not waiting for strike 3. And it all happened because Bai Suocheng was just too successful as a scammer. So when China learned that their own citizens were getting fleeced for billions a year by 2023, Beijing said, "Hey, cool story, bro, but the beginning of the end for you is here as we start freezing all your assets." Now, I will never, ever imply that China would actually sanction random militias to do their bidding, but it is a little weird that Kya-shin's loyalists and his exiled crew, they somehow had abundant resources to launch what is called Operation 1027. It had its own official name. So in October of 2023, the rebels were at Bai's border gates and revenge was served cold. Bai's border guards crumbled under the assault, and those neon lights of his own Sin City were overtaken by the RPGs that were being shot at them. Wow, I giggled. It is funny in a way. And all Bai Suocheng's checkpoints, they fell like dominoes, and within days, the rebels overran the entire town. They were seizing scam compounds and scattering Bai's goons all across the land. And then China would come in like Johnny on the spot and finish the job. They were cleaning up the compounds and pretty much turning up the heat on every aspect of the Bai Mafia family business. Pretty much stepping on the throat of Bai's empire. And I can't help but imagine Kya-shin was laughing his ass off because the tables had completely turned in the most satisfying way for him, as the now 61-year-old Bai Suocheng, the traitor, was sent fleeing to Yunnan province. Now, isn't that cold karma? Just like that, the scam kingpin's golden years, his neon-lit city of sin, turned pitch black. Reports would go on to say that Bai Suocheng pretty much vanished mid-fight. He didn't even stick around to see if he won or lost. He was gone. He probably knew that he lost once China stepped in. And they say that he likely took some secret smuggling routes. And for the next 21 months, Bai was a ghost. He was hiding out in China, in certain low-key safe houses along Yunnan's border towns. He would spend his days in nondescript spots like tea shops and markets. No fancy bunkers here, just cramped apartments, guest houses, and he paid for it, by whatever scam cash he had squirreled away, which is still estimated in the millions in crypto wallets. Plus, he still had friends. Triad friends, IOUs that he could call in. This guy knew and helped a lot of people make a lot of money so that he could make even more money. So he would call upon some Chinese contacts who would simply turn a blind eye, for a cut. So now he was having to adjust to having nothing flashy, just enough to stay off the radar as, like we'll assume, plotting his comeback. Because he is. Because if that bastard Kya-shin could do it, he could do it better. But not really. China found and froze his remaining wallets and raided all of his networks. No more money, okay? And no more money for the exiled is like no more food for rats. They're gonna have to come out of their holes. And in July of 2025, Chinese agents located his Yunnan bolt hole. I had to look up what a bolt hole is, and it simply means a place where a person can escape and hide. And so the agents, they dragged him out of his bolt hole, and it was truly the end of Bai Suocheng. On November 4th, 2025, the Chinese courts threw more than just the book at 63-year-old Bai. They threw the whole fucking Chinese library at them. They nabbed his son as well. Okay, Ying Kang was taken into custody and 3 other associates and pinned them all with fraud, murder, and organized crime. 21 convictions in total. And this is when you know that China does not play, and you should not play with China. They sentenced all of them to death. And as for Suocheng and his son Ying Kang, they got what is called immediate death penalties. A traitorous border king that gets chewed up by his own greed and destroys everything and everyone that he cared about. Addicted to more and more power. They never ever quit while they're ahead, right? Well, if you've made it to the end, it must mean you enjoyed the story. So please, let me know how you liked it. And if you bless me with a subscription and a comment, hey, I promise I truly appreciate it. Now go protect the ones that you love, and don't ever forget to love the ones that protect you.